My name is Clara Wynne. I was 26 years old the morning my stepmother sold my dead mother's piano to pay for my brother's wedding, and she did it before breakfast. At 9:14 a.m., she texted me a photo of the empty corner in our old music room. Under it she wrote, "Good news. The Steinway finally did something useful for this family." By noon, the money from the sale had already been wired to the venue in Charleston where my stepbrother Jason planned to get married under hanging roses and imported lights. At 12:07, my father called and said, "Don't make this ugly, Clara. It was just a piano." He was wrong. It was the last object in this world my mother had touched every day with her own hands. And by 4:30 that same afternoon, I was standing inside First Commonwealth Bank with a brass key my mother had hidden for 11 years, waiting for them to bring out the box that would ruin every lie they had told me. If you know what it feels like when family calls theft a sacrifice, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe to her silence, because the loudest revenge is not always the one that shouts first. My mother, Elise Wynne, taught piano out of the front room of our house on Branton Hill. We were never rich, but music paid the mortgage, groceries, and my school shoes. The Steinway was older than I was, older than my parents' marriage, older even than the house. She bought it after winning a regional competition at 21. There was a tiny burn mark near the left leg where my father had once dropped a soldering iron while trying to help move it. She never let him forget it. When I was little, I would sit under the piano during lessons and count the pedals and watch the vibration in the strings when she played Debussy. That piano was not furniture in our house. It was breath. It was proof that my mother existed before illness made her small. She died when I was 15. Ovarian cancer. 42 years old. My father cried like a man whose roof had caved in, then remarried within 14 months. Nadia came in carrying candles that smelled like vanilla smoke and opinions nobody asked for. Her son Jason was 19 then, all polished teeth and expensive dreams. Nadia never liked the piano because it took up usable space and reminded people the house had belonged to another woman before her. She once called it a giant black widow sitting in the middle of the room. My father laughed, and I remember my mother's metronome ticking on the bookshelf like it had heard him. For years, Nadia tried to get rid of it in soft ways first. She suggested donating it to a church, then a college, then a restaurant lobby. Then she started calling movers for estimates, pretending she was only curious. Every time I objected, my father would say, "No one is touching your mother's piano." But he said it the way weak men promise things. Softly. Temporarily. Only until the next pressure came. When Jason got engaged to a girl named Marin with a social media following bigger than his paycheck, the wedding turned into a family emergency. Suddenly, there were tasting menus, floral deposits, drone videographers, custom chairs, a string quartet for the rehearsal dinner, and a wedding planner who spoke in $1,000 sentences. Jason and Marin kept saying they were curating an experience. What they were actually doing was bleeding everybody dry. Nadia took out a line of credit. Jason borrowed from friends. My father dipped into his retirement once, then again. By August, they were $28,000 short, and every dinner conversation became about sacrifice. Not theirs, of course. Mine. The first time Nadia brought up the piano directly, she did it over chicken soup as if she were discussing weather. A concert-grade Steinway in this market could clear 80 grand, she said. Jason didn't even look embarrassed. He just kept eating. My father stared at the table and said, "It's not the worst idea." I put my spoon down and asked if everyone at that table had lost their minds. Nadia said, "Clara, grief is not ownership." I said, "Actually, probate is." She smiled the way people smile right before they decide to do the thing anyway. 2 days later, I checked the music room and found a man measuring the doorway. He said he was from Atlantic Piano Transit. I told him to leave. Nadia came downstairs furious and said she had every right because she was running this household now. My father stood behind her with his hands in his pockets and said, "Maybe we should all calm down." That sentence ended more of my childhood than my mother's funeral did. I called Aunt Renee, my mother's older sister, and for 10 seconds she said nothing. Then she asked me one question. "Did your mother's blue wool coat survive?" I said yes. She told me to check the inside hem on the right seam. I drove home so fast I ran a yellow light on Mercer Avenue. The coat was still in the hall closet, pushed behind Nadia's winter jackets. Inside the hem, under 3 crude hand stitches, was a brass key wrapped in wax paper with my name written on it in my mother's handwriting. "Clara, if they ever decide sentiment is expensive, open the box." I sat on the closet floor and cried so hard I scared myself. The next morning, I went to First Commonwealth with Aunt Renee. Safe deposit box 1147 had been rented in my mother's maiden name, but I was listed as secondary access beginning on my 25th birthday. The bank manager checked my ID twice, looked at the key, and disappeared through a gray door. When he returned, he carried the box like it weighed more than metal should. Inside were 6 things: a notarized inventory of my mother's instruments and teaching assets, the original purchase certificate for the Steinway, a deed transfer placing the piano and all income from her private lesson studio into the Elise Wynn Educational Trust, a sealed letter addressed to me, a sealed letter addressed to my father, and a contract signed 3 months before her death stating that if the piano was ever sold without written approval from the trust beneficiary, the trust's attorney was authorized to file immediate civil action for recovery, conversion, and breach of fiduciary duty against any household member involved. There was also one more line, highlighted in yellow by my mother herself: "Current beneficiary upon daughter's 25th birthday, Clara Wynn." I didn't scream. I didn't laugh. I didn't even feel triumphant. I felt cold. The kind of cold that comes when the truth finally has paperwork. The letter to me was short. "Your father is a good man when someone stronger is not standing beside him. Do not confuse love with reliability. Protect what is yours before they teach you to feel guilty for doing it." At 11:40 a.m., I called the attorney listed in the trust papers, Miriam Sloan. She already knew my mother's name. Apparently, my mother had prepaid 5 years of trust maintenance and left instructions that if the Steinway was sold, Miriam was to move fast. Very fast. By 1:15 p.m., Miriam had confirmed the piano had been sold that morning to a collector in Wilmington for $84,000. By 2 o'clock, she had sent demand notices to the buyer, the transport company, and my father's house. By 3:30, she learned the funds had been partially transferred to Jason's wedding planner. By 4 o'clock, she told me not to speak to anyone until she arrived. This is the part where most people expect a meltdown. I didn't give them one. Sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes it is a room you stand in while the walls move around everyone else. That evening, Nadia hosted what she called a family toast for Jason and Marin in our backyard because the final venue payment had gone through. String lights, champagne, 40 guests, a cake with their initials in gold leaf. Jason tapped his glass and thanked everyone who helped make this dream happen. Nadia actually looked at me when he said it, as if I should feel proud that my mother's piano had turned into imported peonies and a dance floor. Then Miriam Sloan walked in through the side gate in a navy suit carrying 2 envelopes and a portable speaker case full of documents. She did not wait to be invited. "I'm here on behalf of the Elise Wynn Educational Trust," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My father went pale before she even reached the patio. Nadia stepped forward and tried that false politeness women like her weaponize. "This isn't the time." Miriam handed her the first envelope and said, "The time was this morning before you sold trust property you did not own." Jason looked confused, then annoyed, then frightened in exactly that order. Miriam read the inventory aloud. 1 Steinway Model B, serial number included. 1 teaching library. 1 annual lesson income stream. 1 designated beneficiary, Clara Wynne. Then she read the recovery notice. Sale proceeds to be frozen. Wedding vendor transfer subject to clawback. Civil complaint prepared against Nadia Wynne, Daniel Wynne, and Jason Mercer as knowing beneficiaries of converted trust assets. Marin's mother actually sat down on the garden wall with her hand over her mouth. Somebody near the drinks table whispered, "Is this real?" Miriam turned and said, "Very." Then she gave my father my mother's sealed letter. He opened it with hands that shook so hard he tore the corner wrong. He read the first page silently, then the second out loud only because Nadia demanded to know what it said. Halfway down, his voice cracked. Elise had written that she knew Nadia hated the piano. She knew Jason would one day need money for something flashy. She knew my father's greatest weakness was not cruelty, but compliance. She wrote, "Daniel, if this letter is being read, then you stood by while they took from our daughter the one thing I asked you to protect. If you want forgiveness, do not ask me. Ask the child you taught to live around your silence." My father cried then. Truly cried. Not neat tears. Not performance. The kind that make a man look startled by his own face. Nadia called my mother manipulative. Jason demanded to know if his wedding would be canceled. And that was the moment I finally spoke. I said, "You sold the wrong woman's last gift." Miriam gave them 48 hours to recover the remaining funds and 7 days to return the piano before filing publicly. Jason's wedding planner refused to release the venue hold without payment, so yes, the Charleston wedding collapsed. Marin left 2 weeks later, said she wasn't marrying into legal chaos. Nadia moved out before Thanksgiving. She took the vanilla smoke candles and the white sofas and every last trace of herself she could carry. My father asked if we could talk. I told him paperwork first, apologies second. The piano came home on a rainy Thursday in October. I stood in the doorway while the movers rolled it back across the wood floor, past the same corner where my mother used to teach scales to anxious 10-year-olds. The burn mark on the leg was still there. So were 2 faint scratches near the bench where I had once practiced in socks and slipped. I put my hand on the lid, and for the first time since my mother died, I did not feel like the house belonged to ghosts. 6 months later, I reopened the room as the Elise Wynne studio and used a portion of the recovered damages to fund free lessons for girls whose families think art is a luxury. My father comes by on Tuesdays now to fix hinges and repaint trim. He does not enter unless I invite him. Some relationships do not heal all at once. Some earn their way back in measured inches. And Nadia? The last thing she ever said to me was that it was absurd to destroy a wedding over an old instrument. I almost answered. Then I remembered my mother's note, the bank box, the inventory, the highlighted line with my name on it. So I let silence do what it does best. I let it tell the truth without raising its voice. If you made it to the end, comment the word key. And if you believe quiet people are the ones family underestimates the most, subscribe to her silence. Because sometimes they sell what was yours, smile while doing it, and call it family. And sometimes all it takes to change everything is one hidden key, one open box, and one woman who finally stops asking for permission.